If I asked you what makes you vulnerable, you'd probably think of a lot of different things. Being sick, being injured, or even being afraid. But what vulnerability really is a risk of being harmed physically, emotionally, and psychologically. However, on the other side of risk is what keeps us safe. That's resilience. It's immunity, it's healing, it's courage. And as a living being, you are at a constant war with risk, vulnerability versus resilience. Nonetheless, you survive. And it might come as a relief, but the riskiest, most vulnerable period of your life is already over, when you were a fetus in your mother's womb. As a fetus, you're subjected to everything your mother eats, drinks, and is involuntarily exposed to. Of course, you are still resilient, and the placenta is a huge source of that resiliency. It's the organ whose function is to pump in nutrients, filter out toxins, and keep you growing healthy in the womb. But it's not perfect, and that's why doctors strongly advise pregnant women not to smoke or drink alcohol, because fetuses are just not resilient enough to handle those toxins even in very small amounts. Science knows this now, but that has not always been the case. Which begs the question, what else could we be exposing babies to in the womb that we haven't identified as dangerous yet? This leads us to my research, where I ask, how do antidepressant medications affect a developing fetus? For many years, pregnant women have taken these medications to treat depression, but we actually don't know how they impact a fetus, if at all. What's lacking is evidence of something biological, measurable, and significant that is being changed by the chemicals in these drugs. That's why I will be using nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy to measure if antidepressant drug use raises or lowers the amount of tiny molecules called metabolites in the placenta, which might indicate how well that organ is doing its job. If I find abnormal amounts of these metabolites, I'll finally provide biological, measurable, and significant evidence that fetuses are being affected by the presence of the chemicals in these drugs. However, like I have said, we are all resilient, and that includes the children in my study. Further research is required to see if, how, and why these placental changes impact a child's development after birth and beyond. After all, many of these women are dependent on these drugs to make them more resilient against the effects of depression. So we don't want to write off these medications too early, because we're only just beginning to understand what makes us vulnerable. But the better we get at understanding our risks, the more resilient we can become. Nonetheless, we survive.